what can be put into the Constitution can slip away from you very quickly. And the greatest example going on right now before our very eyes is Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, which they're just disappearing with a magic wand, as if it doesn't exist, even though it could not be clearer what it's stating. And so, they want to kick it to Congress. So it's going to be up to us on January 6, 2025, to tell the rampaging Trump mobs that he's disqualified. And then we need bodyguards for everybody in civil war conditions, all because the 9 justices, not all of them, but these justices who have not many cases to look at every year, not that much work to do, a huge staff, great protection, simply do not want to do their job and interpret what the great 14th Amendment means.
So that's Jamie Raskin, congressional representative out of Maryland, with a pretty dire warning or promise. I'm not sure which, to be honest. But what he's talking about there is Section 3, I believe. Yes, Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. And what does that say? It says, no person shall be a senator or representative in Congress or elector of president and vice president, or hold any office, civil or military, under the United States or under any state who, having previously taken an oath as a member of Congress or as an officer of the United States, or as a member of any state legislature or as an executive or judicial officer of any state, to support the Constitution of the United States. So basically, anybody that's taken the oath to uphold the Constitution, says, shall have engaged in insurrection or rebellion against the same, or given aid or comfort to the enemies thereof, but Congress may, by a vote of 2/3 of each house, remove such disability. So essentially what Mr. Raskin, Congressional Representative Raskin, is saying there is that based off of what happened on J6, he believes that the Supreme Court has failed to adjudicate the Colorado movement. I forget who brought it, but essentially they were trying to get Trump removed from the ballot, and the Supreme Court wouldn't hear it. And they're now claiming, apparently in that clip, that they will move to, on next J6, do exactly what Trump is accused of doing, which is to, in my opinion, overthrow democracy. So how do you like that? Pretty concerning that the party of defending democracy, they cannot stop saying that for the life of them would threaten such a thing. And as you guys know, not a big diehard Trump supporter, but I am still. Well, first off, let's talk about the ticket that the Democrats decided to put up. I'm of the opinion that a ticket with, say, RFK Jr., lifelong Democrat, Tulsi Gabbard, who ran for president as a Democrat just an election cycle ago, or two. No, it was just last one. Wow. That ticket, if you were to flip it, either way, Tulsi Gabbard, RFK, Tulsi Gabbard. I think that's a interesting ticket that at least signals to the American people that we are still interested in being America to some extent. Are both of them great on guns? No. RFK with his kind of Green New Deal agenda of his old position, obviously very concerning. Way more left than I am, just to put it bluntly, on many issues. But they do speak out against the deep state a lot when it comes to the CDC, FDA, HHS, just big pharma, military-industrial complex, all down the line. Both of them have good things to say about that. The intelligence agencies, FBI, CIA, the attacks on his relatives, Tulsi with her military experience and realizing that the war on terror had been a fool's errand. They at least have what I consider the best aspects of Democrats in that there is still an anti-establishment vibe that they portray. And I can't think of anything more establishment than Tim Walz and Kamala Harris. Not in that they are they've been in the game forever, and not Joe Biden, who's about truly as establishment as it gets, right up there with Nancy Pelosi. These people that have just swamp monsters that just bask in it. But in terms of just pure vehicles for the establishment, people that really aren't marketable, there's no world in which Kamala Harris is an appealing candidate to the vast majority of Americans. And this is not my opinion. This is based off of polls and voting when she was running for the president of the United States, when she dropped out before Iowa. She is a disastrous candidate. She has already tried and failed miserably. The only win she has is being second fiddle to Joe Biden, who was assisted into the White House. But Walz is, by the way, for those that aren't forever online, Kamala Harris came out this morning and announced that she would be putting Tim Walz, the governor of Minnesota, as her VP on her ticket. And this guy, man, if you don't know anything about what's happened in Minnesota over the past, decade, or, I guess I'll only credit him with since he's been in office, but man, oh man, if you want to see the destruction of America, a Kamala Harris Tim Walz ticket is right up there with the apex of what I could possibly muster. Really, really bad. Like super, super un-American. It's true. That's what they're about. Tim Walz was in lockstep with the entire BLM movement and the entire rioting insanity of 2020. If you recall, Minnesota was hit very hard by riots. They've also had massive immigration issues where you now have, essentially riots that happen in malls and things like that from the Somali immigrants there. He's also, he was about as harsh on mandates, the COVID era, as any governor in the country. Right up there with Gretchen Whitmer, Gavin Newsom. And I guess the thing that I was reflecting on this morning when that announcement came down that he would be her VP pick is that there really is no prominent Democrat in America, Democrat politician in America that has any record to speak of that I wouldn't find to be just horrifying. And that's different than it used to be. I've never been a Democrat. I've never really liked Democrats, to be honest, but there was still a time where there was still a sense of being, you could still be a patriot and be a Democrat. That's really not a thing anymore, in my opinion. I don't see Democrat politicians as being defenders of the Constitution on really any level. Their new worldview is that of censorship and gun grabbing and unlimited wars and never question big pharma and never question big tech. And just the list goes on and on. There's almost no semblance of any of the good qualities of what I used to perceive Democrats to be. And I still think that there's many Democrat voters that maintain those values, and God bless them. But in terms of politicians with a record, think about who else she could have picked that had any name recognition. Gretchen Whitmer? Come on. Pure nightmare. From the Fednapping hoax to as vicious on lockdowns as anybody else. Gavin Newsom completely destroyed not just the greatest state in America, but probably the greatest landmass on earth. And he's just toast. This Shapiro guy that she was floating, I've never even heard of, so he doesn't have any name recognition to speak of. Neither does Walz, for that matter. But it's just that the Democrat politicians that have a record are now, broadly speaking, the polar opposite of the direction that I want to see America go in. And that's crazy to me. It's just absolutely bizarre to see how far they've fallen. And what's even more concerning, if these polls are to be believed, which I'm not sure they are, I don't know, that this Harris ticket, which is one of the most unlikable people I've ever seen in American politics, with an ideology that's even worse than her personality. But yet she is neck and neck with Donald Trump, who just nearly was assassinated by an inch less than a month ago. And she is still neck and neck with him in the polls. So assuming those polls are accurate, what it tells us is that half of the people being polled are some of the dumbest motherfuckers on the planet. Not to say that Trump is great, but if it comes down to a Trump versus Kamala Harris battle, which it appears that it will at this junction, and you're thinking that you might actually cast a vote for Kamala Harris, madness. I don't know how else to describe it. You live in a madhouse and you're stuck with these people. And they just continue to drive us. We're already falling off the cliff and they're hitting the gas pedal. It's absolutely amazing to witness. There is just no American ethos that I can see in them. It's just pure animosity for everything that I think of when I think about America. Like independence, an ability to defend yourself, an ability to speak freely, non-intervention, anti-war to a certain extent. Do they have it? Do you think they have it? Do you think that they have any affinity for what made America great at all? Because from my viewing, they don't. They have zero love for this country. And that's amazing to me that like 50% of the people that are being polled are like, yeah, that's what I want. I also have zero love for this country. Amazing. Amazing to witness. But anyways, the point I was making is that you can't possibly replace this Walz guy with any other Democrat of any name recognition that has a record that wouldn't be just as crazy and scary. Like, I can't think of a single one. Put up Andrew Cuomo. Okay. Terrible. I can't think of many others, but any of the people in the Congress would have been just as bad, undoubtedly. Senate, same. Like, the only thing you could have done would have been Michelle Obama, who doesn't have a record because she was just the first lady, and she declined. So I think the only thing that they could have done to basically make it hard for me to judge what this would actually represent would have been someone like The Rock or Oprah. I mean, I still would have been very transparent to you and I, to be honest. But I mean, for the average American to view a ticket with like Kamala Harris and The Rock, or Kamala Harris and Oprah, it would have been like, all right, well, this is at least interesting. Like, it would have got the dumb people to be like, oh, wow, The Rock. Ugh. But now it's just obvious. It's obvious what this ticket represents. It represents just pure animosity for the Constitution and the American people more broadly, and everything that has been, when we must be unburdened by it. That to me, it's just screams that in my face. Like, we are absolutely going to destroy every single pillar of what once made America great. And I guess, to credit to Donald Trump, I don't know how he could have possibly seen this coming, but the Make America Great Again moniker certainly applies here. I mean, you could not have more of a polar opposite marketing campaign than that of Kamala Harris and Donald Trump at this junction. And we'll see what the American people decide. And just so people understand, this is not an endorsement on either side as much as it is analysis. I'm just genuinely trying to understand the tickets that are being presented to the American people and what the American people's selection will represent for us moving forward. Because I'm yet to make up my mind if I'll support Donald Trump or not. You're already crystal clear. I will not be supporting the Democrats ever. But I am still holding out any sort of decision in hopes that we can continue to leverage whatever influence the libertarian community has on making Donald Trump and his cabinet, most importantly, better. But going back to what Jamie Raskin said there, I mean, there are people that participated in J6 that said almost the exact same thing for that day, that are now serving almost 2 decades in prison. And he's saying it as a sitting congressman. How is that not an insurrection? If the Supreme Court has deemed it that you cannot remove Donald Trump from the ballot, or at least they won't hear it, and you're going to say, well, now we're going to make a motion to overthrow the will of the people after they vote in November. They certify the votes. There we go. Duh. I remembered it. And they're going to do the same thing. I mean, can you imagine if that happens? It's just so dangerous. And I don't know why people, like, whatever Trump does, there's always this, he's so dangerous, such an existential threat to you and your loved ones and the country and democracy and the foundation of this country and blah, blah, blah. But then they do the same stuff. They do like the exact same stuff, and sometimes and oftentimes more egregious, and yet they do it with zero shame and zero fear of repercussions. And what does that tell you? It tells you that they work for the regime. They work for the establishment. There is no fear to be had because the regime, the establishment, the courts, the entire machine will never come for you the way they've come for Trump or his supporters. ever. And this is exactly what Tulsi Gabbard made a point of in an interview yesterday, which I want to play for you guys. It's absolutely amazing.
The troubling part about all this is it's not even people who we vote for. When you look at what happened when President Biden had that infamous debate with President Trump, it exposed the reality that many of us have known for a long time, which is that President Biden has not been the guy calling the shots. He has not been the guy making the decisions, nor has it been Kamala Harris, for that matter, nor will it be if she is elected president. It is this cabal of, the Democrat elite, the woke warmongers, made up of the likes of Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama and, Tony Blinken and Jake Sullivan and, people who are in the military industrial complex, people who profit from us being in a constant state of war. It is those in the administrative state, in the national security state, who derive more authorities and ability to take away our liberty when we are in a heightened state of crisis.
Just wanted to give major props to Tulsi Gabbard, who I've met a few times, and she's always come across as a very nice person. I don't know her well enough to judge how sincere she is, but there was news that came out about 48 hours ago, and these are whistleblowers, so I want to be very clear that this has not been confirmed at this junction, but it does seem plausible that if there's whistleblowers within kind of the TSA, security, it's called the Clear Skies program. It's what they use to essentially track potential terrorist activity when it comes to the airlines. And there are whistleblowers within that system that function in, I assume, DHS, Department of Homeland Security, that have come forward stating that Tulsi Gabbard has been added to the Clear Skies, what amounts to a terrorist watch list. That means that you have special security measures that you're put through. On top of that, you have a ground team of actual human beings that follow you every time you travel. So every time she books a flight, that means that there is someone essentially spying on her as she goes through the airport. Then they get on the plane. It's madness. If these reports are accurate, it's absolutely nuts. This is a military veteran who ran for president, for God's sakes. Now, Hillary Clinton has already essentially labeled her a Russian asset because she wasn't willing to, engage with the Syria issue the way that the Democratic Party wanted her to. But now they're essentially treating her like a terrorist. And this is less than a month after there's an attempt made on Donald Trump's life, the former president of the United States, who's still the favorite, according to the betting markets, to be the next president of the United States, attempt made on his life. And now you're putting former Congress people, military veterans, former candidates for the president of the United States under the Democratic Party. And allegedly you are putting her on a terrorist watch list for air travel. Astonishing. Absolutely astonishing. So why do I say all that, other than the fact that it's very interesting and illuminating, is that, well, as I said, I don't know her well enough to know if her politics are sincere, but I will tell you this. To say something like that it just strikes you as being honest, as being deeply, deeply truthful, and dangerously truthful for someone in her position to say it. To someone who was in the Democrat machine, saw it firsthand, and now to come out and essentially whistleblow herself and explain to the American people that you are not voting for who rules over you. And in fact, you cannot vote for them because they aren't elected. That's what she's saying there. She doesn't just say it broadly. She's not just saying in, broad strokes here. She's saying explicitly. She's naming people from Blinken to Clinton to Obama. And many, many others she names. It's just a remarkable time to be alive, honestly. Do you have a guy who's running for president, RFK Jr., who's talking about how the government took out his multiple members of his family, to Donald Trump, who had an attempt made on his life, which we've already covered in detail, why I'm so skeptical as to the truth of who was responsible for that and whether or not there was multiple parties involved, to now having a former candidate for president, military veteran, and congresswoman who's saying essentially the same thing, or a different angle of the same thing, which is that we are not in control. Now, for most libertarians, this is not new news. We have been aware of this for quite some time. Most of us realized it quite succinctly when it came to Ron Paul running for president and the GOP stonewalling him and the media burying him or ignoring him, either way. So we've all kind of been on this page for 10, 15 years, some of us longer. And now it seems as if more and more people, even former Democrats like RFK Jr. and Tulsi Gabbard, are coming around to that same conclusion. But simultaneously, you have Donald Trump, who talks about this stuff, not in my opinion, not as explicitly as she did there, but he does hint at it quite often. Then you have Vivek Ramaswamy, who's also a rising star in the GOP. He talks about this stuff a lot. Mike Lee, there's others. This is a big shift. This is a big shift that you have actual people who have served, not just in the government, but also in the military, that are coming out and talking like this. And it's, I mean, if there's a reason for hope in this junction, given that we cannot really vote our way out, well, that's it. That you have people with tremendous influence that are actually explaining to the American people that you cannot vote your way out, that this is an unelected bureaucracy that actually runs things, that these are financial interests and military interests that actually dictate the policy of our government. And I'll throw scare quotes on our, because it's not. Because we don't get to make the changes or the decisions, or even elect the representatives that make the decisions on our behalf. They don't. Amazing. And kudos to Tulsi for being willing to say it. Let's finish this clip out.
It is their friends and billionaires and people in media who all derive their power from being able to have a figurehead that essentially they can control. And the most troubling part about, there's so many things wrong with this, of course, but really at the most fundamental level, you look at our country is the oldest democracy in the world, but the reality of a truly functioning and thriving democracy that has brought to life the vision that our founders had for us, that we really have a government of, by, and for the people, and that we have the ability and responsibility, for that matter, to ensure that the government we have only exists with the consent of the governed. That becomes very hard to do, to hold people accountable, when the person that you voted for is certainly not the one making the decisions.
That is the Modern Wisdom Podcast. Thank you guys for doing that interview and letting me play a portion of it. Does that strike you as false? Does that strike you as a World Economic Forum young global leader, which she is constantly accused of because she was put on their website back in like 2015, which she now obviously disavows, as does Donald Trump, as does Vivek, as does anybody that's had any relationship with them in the past. Look, I can't ever know if people's change of heart is sincere without knowing them personally and being around them for days, if not weeks, if not months, or years. It's very hard to know someone's heart. In politics in particular, it's so challenging. This is why I was such a huge supporter of Dave Smith and wanted him to run, because I really know the guy, and I was like, that's a true believer. That's what we need, which is why I ended up running for VP, because I was like, I don't know who else to support. Well, the same thing applies with Vivek and Tulsi and all these people, and RFK Jr. for that matter. Massive change of heart that happened over the past 3-4 years, and it's very hard to know. It's very hard to know. But when you say stuff like that, even if you say, just assume for a second she is controlled opposition, it's still meaningful to have that level of truth being told. And for the record, I don't think she's saying this in a controlled opposition role. I think she's saying it in a sincere way, because I don't see how a controlled op would say that and it would be to the benefit of the regime. It seems totally counterintuitive to me. So I'm going to believe for now that she is in fact telling the truth, and this is actually her sincere belief that she is really concerned. And I think this is kind of what the Trump family, as you guys know, I had a very lengthy conversation with Donald Trump Jr. in person one time. And it was like, basically, every time I talk to these people, and I don't say this with any condescension whatsoever, it's that it's like they're libertarians in 2000. I think that's the best time. Like before 9/11, before lockdowns and 20 years of war and the war on terror and the Patriot Act. And, they're just coming around. They're just waking up to how deeply corrupt everything is. And again, I'm not saying this with condescension. I want people to have those revelations. I want them to actually wake up and see what you and I see. And anytime people that are in our camp see someone having that revelation, they go, controlled op. Maybe Sometimes I'm sure that's true. But I think in many instances it's not. It's just that people are later to the game than you and I, that they haven't been privy to so much of the depravity in the government as far back as we were. And we should welcome them. We should embrace them. We should thank them, especially those that have a huge reach like she does. That clip, I ran it on my Twitter last night before I went to bed. It's got almost 4 million impressions already and like 80,000 likes. I could say the same thing. I could probably even say it better, but it doesn't matter because it's not going to reach that many people. And I'm not as pretty, so not as many people are going to live or listen. So I think that's a really good sign for us and a really healthy sign that people are waking up. Anyways, I got to run and do my show with Luke Rudowski, the best political show over on We Are Change on Rumble. So I will come back and record part 2 and release that later. And we're back. New outfit, same Clint. Thank you for continuing to watch. Jamie Raskin actually had more to say, so I'm going to run that clip for you guys. Just this did not go quite as viral, so I don't think many people have seen this portion.
But last night, I was most worried about the Supreme Court's prospective imminent abdication of its very clear duty to disqualify Donald Trump from the ballot under Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, and what that might mean if their decision says that it's really up to Congress on January 5th or January 6th, 2025, to disqualify him at the counting of the Electoral College votes, which really could lead to something akin to civil war, if that's what the suggestion is, which is what I think I heard when I went to the oral argument, that they themselves were unwilling to rule whether or not the Colorado Supreme Court was correct in finding that he had engaged in insurrection on January 6, 2021. So
here's the thing. First off, Donald Trump was never charged with insurrection. So the Colorado Supreme Court ruling, in my opinion, is obviously nonsense, because don't you have to convict someone of that charge before you can actually deem them unfit for office forevermore? Apparently not. But I think what's even more profound about that disclosure by Mr. Raskin is that he acknowledges that this could lead to a CW, as they say. And I fear that he could be right. I mean, but this is there's a distinct difference from the claim he's making versus the one that Donald Trump made. Now, you don't have to agree with Trump, and I'm not even sure that he's right. But he was questioning the outcome of the election, thinking that maybe there was malfeasance. This is totally different. This is saying, yes, whatever the outcome of the election was, yes, maybe it is proper. But the reality is that he is now constitutionally forbidden because of his actions in 2020 from running at all. But you don't actually have that adjudicated, so you're just going to have congressional motions to remove him. Well, that's another step, like this ratchet effect. We just keep going closer and closer to the precipice, and it seems extraordinarily dangerous to me. And I don't know why there's not more concern that if you don't allow this to play out democratically, yes, I know it's a republic, calm down, that things could get really ugly. And what I've been wanting to talk to you guys about what's happening in the UK, and I'm very concerned about it. Not so much because I care about the UK, because I don't really care that much about the UK. I wish them well, but it's not where I live, so it's not nearly at the top of my priority list. But I do like looking at these other nations for lessons and warnings. I do the same thing with Canada. I do the same thing with Australia or New Zealand. Basically any, Western democracy that is further down the road into socialism, I think is really important to look at and to analyze, what's transpiring so that we can take those lessons and not follow them, not go further down the path. All of those nations I just listed off are largely disarmed, if not entirely. And I think that once you get to that level of tyranny, you're in a really terrible spot. And many of them are in those spots now. And yes, I have sympathy for them. I feel bad for the people, particularly those that have opposed this every step of the way. But at the same time, my primary concern is that we don't do what they're doing. So let's get into that a little bit. Let's break this down.
Arresting you on suspicion of improper use of the electronic communications network. I'm just
What?
27 of the Communications Act, okay? So you do not have to say that it may harm your defence if you don't mention one question, something which you later rely on court. Anything you do say may be given evidence. Do you understand that?
So I'm actually being
You're
arrested.
going to be arrested, okay?
Right,
Take
and-
you up to the police station.
Right.
Ask you, okay, this is in relation to some comments that you've made on a Facebook page. Okay?
Oh, really? Oh, it's a Facebook crime, is it?
Okay.
Right.
So we need to ask you some questions about that.
But I'm going to be
We've had
arrested for
reports that
posting on
you've made
Facebook.
some comments that are offensive, obscene, and people have made a complaint about that, and it's
And
they've
can
come
you-
from
can you
a
tell me what
Facebook
this
account
comment
in your
was?
name.
We'll do
Okay,
that
well,
all
we'll
in
do
an
that when
interview.
we interview you.
All right.
So that fine lad is being arrested under Communications Act 2003, section 127. This section covers the improper use of public electronic communication networks. It states that a person is guilty of an offense if they send a message that they know to be false or persistently use a public electronic communications network. The section also covers sending messages that are grossly offensive, indecent, obscene, or menacing. So not just threats, which I think in America you could still get in trouble for, but just offensive, indecent, or obscene. How much more broad could you get? Since 2010, this section has been used to arrest and prosecute people for messages posted on sites like Twitter and Facebook. A person found guilty of an offense under this section may face imprisonment for up to 6 months, a fine, or both. So yeah, that's the UK. That's the country that we actually fought a revolution to break away from. And tell me that we are very far from being that ourselves. The answer is we're not very far. And to prove it, let's listen to Kamala Harris's VP selection, Mr. Tim Walz.
I think we need to push back on this. There's no guarantee to free speech on misinformation or hate speech, and especially around our democracy.
There is no guarantee to free speech when it comes to misinformation or hate speech, especially when it comes to our democracy. Well, sorry, Mr. Walz, but all of that is true. Pretty remarkable that you would make those lies consecutively. Now let's listen to this report from the UK.
Some people might be sharing simply to warn their friends, but it could be considered an offence because they're amplifying this.
Absolutely, and that's the key message, is that however you think you're acting innocently on social media, whatever platform it is, you're just sharing something for whatever reason, that could potentially be a criminal offence. And look, it's not an idle threat either, because the Crown Prosecution Service were keen to point out that they've made a number of charges in relation to stirring up of racial hatred online, one of which this morning was for distributing a recording that could, intending to stir up racial hatred. And so they are actually already bringing charges in relation to this sort of thing. So it's a very, very clear message based in the harsh reality, if you like, that if you do this kind of thing, you are potentially committing a criminal offence. There he said it. They've got teams of people scouring the internet looking for this sort of thing. And if you are in the business of sharing or retweeting, whatever platform it might be, potentially criminal material, well, then you could find yourself prosecuted.
You don't even have to say the wrong thing. You can just share it. Like, if a person in the UK were to retweet me, there's a chance that they could be prosecuted for that. Wow. Talk about wow. I mean, so dangerous. But the reason I care, once again, because I am most concerned with America and Americans and American politics, is that we have a vice presidential candidate that is exactly in lockstep with that mentality. That basically free speech ends as soon as you offend somebody else. Which, might I add, there isn't anything that anyone says that doesn't offend someone in this unbelievably oversensitive country or world. It's ridiculous that that would be your litmus test. That it could be offensive. Get out of here. Who defines hate speech? Who defines offensive? Well, it's obviously in the eye of the beholder. These are very challenging questions, which is why, broadly speaking, you don't want to have any sort of laws against speech whatsoever, is that you want to be able to speak freely. And if you give the government the power to dictate what is offensive, what is hate speech, well, then they will classify anything that challenges their regime, their plans, as hateful, as divisive, as inflammatory, as criminal. And if you go along with this Democratic ticket, I'm sorry to say, but I think there's a distinct possibility that, particularly if they get to replace one or two Supreme Court justices, or particularly if they pack the Supreme Court, well, then forget it. Of course they will have enough Supreme Court justices that will not even, overturn whatever their plans are. That is a very big danger. I mean, right up there with any sort of un-American maneuver you could imagine, maybe second only to an outright gun ban and confiscation program, which, by the way, Kamala Harris is promising that as well. So very dangerous. And as I said, I look at these nations for warnings as to where we want to not go, what we ought not to do. And I hope that anybody that's thinking rationally can recognize that this is not what you want to have in your government. You do not want to have a government that actually dictates what is hate speech and what you're allowed to say on the internet. I mean, we're talking about the internet, for God's sakes. This is not actionable stuff. This is your opinion. And where are we now? I mean, where we really are is that if you oppose open borders in the UK, if you say anything with any tone that they don't like when it comes to the immigrant population, they can classify that as inflaming racial tensions, and they can lock you up for 6 months. And that's just the start. These things don't usually go down, they go up in terms of punishments. So I would not be surprised to see that the punishments for the British folks increase. It's terrible. So dangerous. Now here's Kier Starmer, the Prime Minister of the UK, just got into power. And this is a juxtaposition of his reaction when there was the BLM riots, and then now that you have the, quote unquote, alt-right rioting.
Be in no doubt,
I was shocked.
those
and
that have
angered
participated in
at
this
the
violence
killing of George Floyd
will face the full
and the
force
response
of
of
the law.
President Trump
The police
and the US
will be
authorities
making arrests.
to the peaceful
Individuals
protests,
will be
to
held
people
on
rightly
remand.
demanding justice.
Charges will follow,
been an affront to
and
humanity.
convictions will
The last
follow.
week has shone a
I
spotlight
guarantee
on the racism,
you will regret taking part in this
discrimination,
disorder,
and injustice
whether directly
experienced
or
by
those
those
whipping
from
up
black
this
and
action
minority ethnic
online
communities
and then
in the
running
US,
away themselves.
in the UK,
This is not
across the
protest.
world.
It is
Martin
organised,
Luther King
violent
said,
thuggery.
injustice anywhere
And it has no
is a
place
threat to justice.
on our
I mean, amazing. Absolutely amazing justice. If you're listening, it may be hard to pick up the difference, but essentially what he's saying is, these are the cries of the unheard, and there's been a terrible injustice. I'm talking back in 2020 when he's giving this speech. And, we hear you, we understand you, we stand with you. Now it's just, this is thuggery. This is not protest. There is no purpose for this. This is criminal, and we will throw the book at you. Just a complete polar opposite perspective or take on what is a very similar event in terms of the violence that's happening. You have buildings that are on fire. You have people that are being violent and being attacked. All of the same things happen in 2020, but because that is in alignment with his ideology and in alignment with the regime, well, then it's fine in 2020, and it is an existential threat in 2024, and they will absolutely throw the book at you. And it's just like, man, could it be more obvious? Could it be more obvious that this is ideological possession, that the criminal justice system will only be utilized if you actually oppose the establishment. But if you do as the establishment deems fit, well, then you can be as violent and as criminal as you'd like. And that is anarcho-tyranny, definitionally. So that's where the UK is. And honestly, if you saw what happened in 2020 versus what happened on J6, we're not much better. I mean, in many ways, we're the exact same. So it's just crazy.
The offence of incitement to racial hatred involves publishing or distributing material which is insulting or abusive, which is intended to or likely to start racial hatred. So if you retweet that, then you're republishing that, and then potentially you're committing that offence. And we do have dedicated police officers who are scouring social media. Their job is to look for this material and then follow up with identification arrests and so forth. So it's a really, really serious. People might think they're not doing anything harmful. They are, and the consequences will be visited upon them.
This is not a joke, folks. This is like 5-alarm fire in the UK. You cannot speak out in opposition to the current establishment, like what their programs are, which is to allow close to unlimited immigration. And if you have any opposition to that whatsoever, and you voice that online, you can go to jail. You don't even have to get in the streets. See, here's the issue, though. If you criminalize it so that people feel as if they can't speak about these things, then what are they left with? They're left with what you're seeing. Radicalized folks that get out in the street and do crazy stuff. So if you're interested in peace, turn back. Let people speak freely. This entire operation to try and suppress dissident thought and dissident speech is only dividing us further, and it is only radicalizing us further. And on both sides. And don't get it twisted. This is still going to be used against both sides of the political aisle. It's just if you get out of the line in a way that actually bothers them. It's not really principled as much as it is like the principle of power. Are you challenging my power or aren't you? If you go along with my power, if you're doing as I would prefer, then I'll let you violate the law. And if you get out of line on the left, say they come out and they actually, get their head out of their asses and they start to oppose all wars, not just one. Well, then I would imagine that the regime could concoct a whole bunch of reasons that what you have to say is now hateful. This ought to be a unifying oppositional force. Like you ought to all recognize this as a threat to every single person that lives in the UK. Unfortunately, I don't think people will perceive it that way. Those that have been indoctrinated into this, woke mind virus that there's just oppression and straight white guys are the devil, that anything that diminishes their capacity to speak will probably be perceived as a positive. That, oh, well, thank God. Someone had to do something about these people, these racists that are stirring up, bigotry and zealotry online. It doesn't work, okay? There are alternative platforms. You're never going to stop people from speaking out. And if you manage to, then you only leave them with the option of getting into the streets. And if you're going to then criminalize that, well, then when they get into those streets, they're going to be violent, right? Because you're already going to go to jail just because you're in the streets. And they've told you can't be. They've told you can't speak online. So what are you left with? You either give up or you go crazy. I'd really rather not push any group of people into that corner. I think it's super dangerous for everybody that's interested in peace. Why would you possibly do that? And obviously the natural next question is, are they interested in peace? Or are they trying to radicalize people and trying to roll out additional laws so that they can put these people in prison for much, much longer? And I don't know what the answer is for sure, but that's kind of the trajectory that they seem to be on. And I'm not sure that we aren't on that trajectory too. So let's not. Here's an anchor on GBN that's essentially reflecting my views on this.
The way to stop this is start to actually ask the question, why? Why are these riots happening? We should obviously condemn them. We should condemn people attacking police officers, setting things on fire. But we need to ask the question is, what has happened to this country that a large group of people feel silenced? They cannot speak. They cannot speak about the problems of mass immigration. And when you do, you're labelled, even people on the right or left, you're common sense people who want to have these discussions, you're labelled as a far right person. Now we're actually seeing the real far right in this country rising. And the reason for that is they've been silenced for a long time. We ignore the fact that 80% of this country is actually white. We are constantly not prepared to ask deeper level questions. When BLM riots happened in 2020, the media coverage, the social media coverage was all asking the question, why? Why do black people feel the way they feel in this country, in America? But no one seems to be prepared to ask these questions towards these group of people. Instead, they want to put them all in a box of crazy white EDL far right people, rather than actually sitting there saying, what has happened to this country? Will Kier Starmer actually wake up and actually do something to this? Or will we turn into France, where this is just going to keep on happening on a regular basis?
I think that's a very reasonable, level-headed analysis. Obviously, it mirrors my own, so of course I think it's reasonable and level-headed, but I think it's obviously just accurate. That if you're interested in diffusing some of these tensions, it's the same. It was honestly the same take I had in the early days of the riots of 2020. Before I had any inkling that maybe there was nefarious actors that were funding it and things like that. But I think at the core of it was obviously a genuine discontent. I think that there has been issues with police violence. There has been issues with police violence towards minorities. I think it's also more broad than that. I think there's issues with police violence towards citizens, period. But If you want to racialize it, yes, you can make an additional claim and grievance on that level. And I think that also, people had been locked down and their businesses had been shut down and people were out of jobs for a while, and there was just a lot of turmoil. And then on top of that, you're just being force-fed this clip over and over again. You don't really know the details at the time. And it's just like, people got out in the streets. But people are also dealing with inflation and poverty and this divisiveness in this country and constant propaganda that the GOP and particularly Donald Trump is like, Stalin reincarnate or whatever. And I think that, people were manipulated. So there's like some genuine grievance and then some that's way overblown and kind of ridiculous. But we all ask that question. I think any reasonable person asks that question. But yeah, sure. I think most of us also condemned the violence, and I certainly did. But I think it's fair if you're going to have an open mind and at least consider the complaints of the people that were on the streets in the summer of 2020, that you ought to do the same today. And it seems as if that's totally not allowed, that it's just pure condemnation. I mean, listen to Kier Starmer, their new prime minister. Does he seem interested in having a hearing as to what these people are actually concerned by? Not at all. And that's exactly what happened on J6. Exactly what happened. There was no concern or consideration for the claims that these people were making. It was just throw the fucking book at them and put them all away forever and make it so that anybody that might ever consider to do the same thing will never consider it. And what have you seen since then? Not many protests from right-wingers, huh? So it worked. And I think that's what's being done now, and it's TBD on whether or not it'll work in the UK. But these people have been essentially ignored, just as the black community feels as if they were ignored. So let's hear them. Let's have this conversation. Are open borders acceptable to the population that lives in this current landmass? It's like no other country has this issue, really. I mean, except for Western democracy nations like Japan, China, forget about it. They have hardly any immigration. And there's no concerns about racism when they do that, even though it's probably arguably racist. we want Japan to be Japanese. It's like, okay, I don't care. That doesn't bother me. I think most people don't, even progressives don't look at that and go like, this Japanese, these racists over there, man, unbelievable. It's like, no, everyone just kind of accepts it. It's like, yeah, this is their country. It's a little tiny island. Let them have it. And it's like, do people in other Western nations have the right to say the same thing? And can they say it without being racist? Well, I think you can. And I think you can because, particularly in America, there is not a racial identity that makes you an American. I'm not even sure that I think it's barely over 50% of people in America are even Caucasian. So if you say that you want to keep America American, is that racist? Can it be considered racist? I would say no. I would say that the cultural values that make America great, the things that Kamala Harris and Tim Walz oppose almost universally, are exactly what I'm trying to uphold and to defend. Is that I don't want people to immigrate here if they are not coming here to uphold and defend those values which make America great. Like property rights and free speech rights and gun rights. All of the foundational principles that made America great. I want those to be upheld. So much so that like I'm not even interested in having a conversation about democracy and like whether or not you can vote these things out. Like, no, there should be no discussion as to whether or not you can vote away my rights. These are natural rights. You cannot infringe upon them. But according to the government these days, you certainly can. So if you allow for unlimited immigration of people that don't share our values, those that actually value the Bill of Rights or value natural rights more broadly, do you expect the democratic process to defend those rights or to not infringe on them further? Well, the answer is obviously yes. It will infringe on them significantly more, if not attempt to abolish them entirely. Should I sit back out of fear of being called racist and just say, open up the border and let in anybody communists, everybody, whoever you want, if they hate the American ethos and all of our fundamental principles, even better. No, I mean, it's nonsense. Why? Like, if I didn't function under a democratic system, maybe you can make that argument. But like, no, once they get here, they actually have the capacity to vote away my rights. Should I not be allowed to say I don't want that? I think universally you ought to be allowed to say that without going like, oh, you don't like them because of the color of their skin. No, I don't like them because their fucking ideas suck. Not all of them. There's tons of immigrants that come here for the right reason, and God bless them. But those that want to come here by the millions that don't care about the things I care about and in fact want to get rid of them, why would I possibly open up the door to somebody like that? The answer should be no. And I don't think you should be ashamed in saying it. But most people are, because they've been indoctrinated to fear these labels of racism or whatever else, xenophobia, that they would rather have their rights diminished, if not obliterated, just to avoid the temporary pain of getting labeled something you're not. You're not even that. And I just reject it. I reject the labels, I reject the name calling, and I reject the assertion that I am taking this stand out of some sort of racist instinct when it's not that at all. Some of the people that I think are the best in America are colors different than my own. Who gives a shit? That's awesome. But there's also a lot of people that come from other countries that do not share my values and will actively work to undermine them. Should I view them as an ally? Given that the government is actively working to undermine my rights? Well, the answer is obviously no. They're not my ally. And I won't go so far as to call them my enemy, but if they get here and they start to vote to disarm me or silence my speech or take more of my money, well, then it's hard not to go that route, isn't it? This is a rant that will probably be unpopular with a lot in the libertarian community, and I don't care, because I think it's important that somebody says it, that this is a very important inflection point in American history, and you get to decide, with whatever limited power you have left, whether or not you're going to go along with it and go quietly, or if you're going to make a little bit of sound and a little bit of noise and a little bit of commotion and challenge the regime as they try and obliterate the Bill of Rights. And my answer is, I'm going to be loud as fuck. And I'm not going to stop talking about it. And I'm not going to stop making their job harder, because I think that's as American as it gets. You have to oppose tyrants, right? So let's oppose them while we can. Anyways, thank you guys so much for tuning in. Clint Russell, Liberty Lockdown. If you enjoyed this episode, please do hit the like button, subscribe, share it around, and yeah, just be cool. I'll see you guys soon. Oh, by the way, if you guys saw me on Dave Smith yesterday, or if you haven't yet, I was just on with Dave. Great hour-long rip. Went really hard on the Rittenhouse issue, and then the second half hour was where I got to really let loose, because Dave was not nearly as on top of the Trump attack as I am, and I felt like I got an opportunity to do what Dave does to Rogan, where Dave goes in there and he's like, let me tell you all about the Syria situation, or let me tell you all about Yemen. And then I'm like, Dave, let me tell you all about the second gunman. No, I'm just kidding. I didn't say that, but I just gave him all of like the whole layout of everything and all of the insanity. And I think I may have even convinced him. So that was fun. So yeah, check that out. And if you are coming from over there, you just saw that and you're like, let me see what this guy's about. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and please do subscribe and stick around. Appreciate you guys. See you soon. Peace.